Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out SeanMurphy.net. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we are obsessed with creativity. We love to celebrate story, especially the people that do the storytelling. And as I always like to point out, yes, that includes the creative arts of all sorts. But if you break it down the right way, everything is story. So I'm particularly interested in talking to people who use narrative and the art of telling stories in their professions. And that ranges from everything from the university to the courtroom to business and everything in between. I'm Sean Murphy. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University. I run the nonprofit 1455 Literary Arts. For more about that, check out SeanMurphy.net. But the thing I love most about the roles I have are the amazing and interesting people I come into contact with. Today is not only no exception. This is someone, if you know me, you already know because I've talked to him so many times throughout so much programming I've done, but he's also someone I used to work with. So when I say that this is someone I enjoy talking to and I have talked to, and you'll see momentarily why I have such a great time and learn so much from Dr. Shawn DuBravac. Let me read the official bio, and then I want him to talk about what he does because this is only scratching the surface. But Dr. Shawn DuBravac is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Digital Destiny: How the New Age of Data Will Transform the Way We Work, Live, and Communicate, which explores how the world's mass adoption of digital technologies portends the beginning of a new era for humanity in the realms of business, healthcare, finance, transportation, and culture. I'll say, in addition to making sure you bookmark that to get a copy, it was so prescient because it was cutting edge and revelatory when I read it almost a decade ago. It's only become more revelatory because everything he talked about in that book is playing out now in real time. So, Shawn, obviously you're a writer, you are a tech guru, but you're also an economist, you're a futurist. Let's ease in for the people that don't know you yet. How do you go about your business and you tackle the world from a variety of perspectives, but your expertise kind of is at the intersection of economics, technology, and thinking about how these things impact the future? But do a better job than I just did of talking about why you're you and what your area of expertise is.
Yeah, well, thanks, Sean. It's always good to join you. I love our conversations. I love to see all the things that you're working on as well, and I appreciate that very, very kind introduction. I think you really captured it well. I try to sit at the intersection of economics, technology, and society. I try to understand how the forces that are playing out and all of those spheres are changing us as individuals and changing, us as a society. So there is a lot happening in the economy right now, obviously, and in politics. There's a lot happening in with technology, especially around the AI frontier, and so we're seeing that impact now on society and ultimately on the individual.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, as you know, I can like give you genuine like admiration and praise all day because I did learn so much from you when we worked together and we talked about tech every day, which was a great joy of mine. But if I were to say, well, what is it about Shawn that had such an impact on you? You really helped kind of change the way I approached thinking about these topics because I think those of us, myself included, that came from a more creative humanities background tend to overestimate the creative arts in the sense of we're doing the real thinking and like economics and business, that's a textbook and that they're ideologies and disciplines that people master. What I saw you do day in and day out, and when we go visit clients and they'd ask you these questions, is you actually are understanding how these precepts in the business and economic and tech sectors are constantly evolving and mutating. And that intersection is always kind of a live thing where the economic situation can impact how technology is adopted or how it evolves in the marketplace, just like how human behavior is indelibly impacted by technology. And it was neat because when we worked together, we saw everything from TVs getting bigger to the handheld devices getting smaller. And right around, the mid-aughts, once the iPhone became kind of the device that everyone had, I think you and I both agreed, or I won't even include you, were talking about how at this point we have the toy. Now it's going to be all about the apps and how we're using these devices. Long-winded way of saying you really showed me how to understand how story and narrative worked in the wider world, and how all of these kind of facets are interwoven and are always playing off each other. So at once, we never know what's about to happen, but the more respect we have and the more understanding about these different forces, it helps people like you make really informed predictions about the future.
Yeah, I mean, it is, a big mosaic. We're constantly looking at the powers at play to understand how they're interacting, how they're reacting to each other, and then writing as you would say, writing the narrative on the future.
So you have evolved into, I mean, again, when I first met you, you were an economist, you ran the market research department. You always had a lot of plates that you kept full, but you've become increasingly in demand as a speaker. You will go give guidance to companies, to individuals looking for what are some of the big questions that people are asking you now. And we will get to AI. Feel free to just start with that. But like, what have you noticed, say, in the last 10 years or even in the last year? What are the people that you are being asked to go speak to? What are their big concerns or questions that you think you've got a handle on?
Yeah, I mean, as you noted, I'm a professional keynote speaker, so I do paid keynotes for 50 plus different events throughout the year, and really the focus that I take is helping leaders frame the future, helping them understand the forces that are at play, helping them understand what's coming. As rightfully called out, over the last 2 years, it's been a lot about AI, trying to understand what are the implications for our workforce, what are the implications for the way we do work, what are the implications for the business that we're in and the products and services that we deliver. And so they're trying to understand what AI means for them and ultimately how to integrate it into their operations in a meaningful way. Like, is it just an efficiency hack? Is it just productivity gains, or is it more? And if it's more, what does that mean for us? And so they're really trying to figure those forces out. And as new technologies emerge, they're looking at them with a similar lens. How do we take advantage of this technology? What does it mean for us? And how do we best prepare our organizations for the future? And also, as a result of that, how do we best prepare our people for the future?
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll note that again, I think of you all the time in the sense that I, of course, have straddled. I worked in technology for a couple of decades, but again, I run in more comfortable circles in the creative kind of academic arenas. But as you can imagine, there's two very different perspectives. We worked at an association that was, a legit cheerleader for innovation. And there's complications there, but their role is to advocate for how technology is on balance making our lives better. And on the more artsy academic side, there's always been this kind of fear and loathing, this misunderstanding. What I really have admired and learned again from you is being genuinely optimistic about the ways technology, first of all, a realistic appraisal of they're not going anywhere. Technology has always been with us. It always will be. It's typically met with resistance, but over time, we come to appreciate how it has improved lives. It has improved efficiencies. But you've been very bullish and positive without being a cheerleader, without, you've maintained your independence. But I want to stress that comes from a place of deeply informed opinion making. In other words, you're not being paid to promote a certain product. You're also not being paid to naysay and fearmonger certain products, you're in this interesting lane where you have a lot of clarity, but you've always, since I've known you, just erred on the side of optimism. And the reason I say I learned from that is because I think we instinctively fear things we don't understand. I think your approach has helped allay some of those fears, but you're, as it relates to storytelling, you're not saying, trust me, I'm an expert. You're always offering anecdotes and contextualizing history. Talk about the art of that approach, because you are a natural storyteller, but it's not something that comes naturally. That is a skill that's developed. And I know it comes from a place of voracious curiosity.
Yeah, it definitely comes from a place of curiosity. I think the other point which you alluded to is all great futurists are also good historians. We're looking back in time to see how society absorbed different trends or how they absorb different changes. And do we anticipate, being able to pull that forward? Does the society of the future absorb technology change in the same way, or do they do something different? And at the same time, a lot of that plays out in real time. A great example of that is social media and mobile phones, mobile devices. When they were first on the scene, now 10 plus years ago, they were seen as this great productivity enhancer, this great technology. And over time, we realized some of the negative attributes of those technologies. And so you're seeing, I think, in real time now, society attempting to adjust and attempting to address areas where technology has been less helpful, has been less healthy, and try to move technology use into a way that aligns more with the way we want to live our lives. Now, that isn't often a smooth process. It isn't certainly an immediate process, but I do see people being more aware of some of the negative externalities of certain technology use, whether it's mobile phones broadly or social media in particular within certain age groups. And so they try to address that and to move forward. And so innovation is very iterative in nature, and so I think that's the other aspect of this, is that when you're looking at the story of how technology is going to impact us, you have to recognize that it will impact us differently over time, because technology is evolving and we as humans are also evolving. And so you're trying to find the intersections of that evolution. How is society shifting at the same time? How is technology shifting? And are they going to meet? And are they going to meet in interesting ways? And what does that future look like?
Yeah, so speaking of that, I'm curious, you've been doing this for a long time. Have you found that, especially, the executives at some of the big tech companies, are they is there as they age out and younger people are in charge, are we more tech savvy and more able to use these innovations in effective ways? Or is there more fear than there's ever been? Like, what is the general, or is there just a through line of it's consistent? There's always a bit of both. I'm curious if you've seen any kind of societal shifts from the inside of the corporations and the kind of questions they ask you and want clarity around.
Yeah. I think people are always a little concerned or fearful about change. And it isn't necessarily the change that scares them, but it's the rate of change that scares them. How quickly are these things going to change? And are we going to be able to adapt to that in the same time horizons? Are we going to be able to address the negative externalities while taking advantage of the positive externalities? Are we going to be able to take advantage of the opportunities while we're also addressing some of the negative outcomes? And when I look at AI today, I think one of the things that people really worry about is displacement. And it isn't that AI won't displace workers, but to me, the real question is, will we address that in the same time horizon that displacement takes place? Will we be able to create new jobs, new opportunities for people whose work has changed, whose work is evolving, and will we be able to um, bring those two forces together? So I think that some of the concerns that you see with executives haven't really changed. They are very similar from year to year. They're worried about the rate of change. They're worried about how quickly new technologies will be absorbed, how quickly they need to be absorbed. They, I think every good leader is worried about, what does this mean for my people? How
Yeah.
can I use this to not just produce more of what we're doing, but produce it in a better way and ensure that I'm, bringing my people along. Not every organization probably does that, but I do think the best leaders out there do think often about their people and about empowering their people and augmenting their people in the best ways that they can.
Thanks for that. So just about a year ago, almost exactly, you were part of the Shenandoah speaker series, and of course, we were in a big room full of students. We both anticipated and prepared for questions around AI, which ranged from fear and confusion to some people were very excited about it. What has evolved in my thinking over the last year, it's not enough to say that it's a hypothesis, but one of the things I've been chewing on is what's interesting to me is traditionally, I'm speaking very broadly, but say through the 20th century, technology and big technology tended to, impact the blue collar workforce or mechanical type things that were machine based. And one of the reasons I think there's been so much uncertainty and maybe fear in the artistic and academic space is maybe for the first time, the first line of fire is going to be people that do research or people that have compiled, information that did require kind of human minds or the harnessing a computer. So perhaps there is some genuine fear there. But having said that, I'm curious where you're at right now, just high level with AI, and especially what you would say, good, bad, or ugly, or all of the above, to people that are still very wary or skeptical or want to know more. Like, but how is AI going to impact the world, or and how is it changing things, or how afraid should I be?
I think first you're absolutely right that AI, unlike previous technologies, is impacting professional services more and more pronounced way perhaps than other technologies have. Obviously, the introduction of the computer changed professional services quite significantly, and it impacted every aspect of professional services, from the office worker to the designer to the architect. Like we have seen the broad digitization and the role of computers impact all of that, and now we're seeing AI layer on top of that a new change. And so I do think that the professional service industry recognizes that AI has the potential to have a pronounced impact on the type of work that they do. I think we're still, frankly, we're still very early on. I mean, it's amazing to see how far we've come in such a very short time. ChatGPT has been publicly available for less than 36 months. And at the same time, over 400 million people use ChatGPT on a weekly basis. So you have 5% of the planet using ChatGPT on a weekly basis. That doesn't even include people who might be using other services from competitors. And so you have had a very strong uptake of the technology. And at the same time, it hasn't been around that long. And so we're still discovering use cases. I think the other thing is that the underlying technology is still changing quite rapidly. And when I look at AI scientists who have been working on AI for decades, AI researchers who have been developing AI models for decades, they're even surprised at how quickly the capabilities are changing. And so that really tells me and signals to me that the underlying technology is still growing rapidly and changing rapidly. And in just the last year, we've seen a lot of advances in what AI is able to do because we've changed how it does that. By introducing reasoning models as an example, we've discovered, oh, by giving AI longer to think about a problem, it actually comes back with a better answer. It comes back with better prompts. I think because it's still so new, we're still trying to figure out how to weave it into our workflow. how we can use AI to help streamline some of our work without removing some of the value of the work that we do. And I think that is a challenge. I don't know that we've gotten it right yet,
Yeah.
and you don't have to look very far to find very poor AI infused writing and know like, okay, this was not a good use case for that. And at the same time, there are, I think, a lot of very interesting use cases for it that do streamline it. I was talking with a business just earlier this week, and they were telling me that when they get bids in from their customers, they come in all these different formats. And it historically took a lot of time to take those documents and integrate it into their systems so that they could have a more clear workflow. Now they just feed it into a generative AI system. It reformats it into the way that their systems need that information. And so they've streamlined their process, and they've removed a lot of really mundane manual work that individuals were doing. And so you see these little things. It's not replacing a worker. It's not really replacing a job at all, but it is significantly augmenting a worker, and it is changing the type of work that worker does. And so when you look at the creative arts, I think in a very similar way, we want to see generative AI being used to augment the writer, augment the designer without, fundamentally changing what they do and the value that they bring. And I think there's lots of really interesting use cases that we're seeing when it comes to that. The ability to gather a bunch of information quickly that we can consume and that we can digest and that we can integrate into our work is very interesting. Being able to quickly understand. I spent a lot of time in academic journal articles to be able to quickly understand the nuances of an academic journal article. I find to be very valuable. And so there's lots of very interesting use cases that I think are emerging as a result. And I think probably the next decade, frankly, is about how do we weave AI into our workflows? How do we integrate it into what we're doing, and then over time observe, okay, here's something I was spending 10% of my week on. I don't have to do that anymore. Where am I going to allocate that time now? What are the new tasks that I'm going to pick up? What are the new jobs that I'll be doing as my role evolves?
Yeah, that was so great. Yeah, I had a million thoughts while you were talking, but what occurs to me is I do think, again, especially as it relates to more creative or human endeavors, there's always been a kind of fear and cynicism associated with efficiency, as if the key to efficiency is to eliminate manpower or to make things more affordable. And there are elements of that, but I think we do ourselves a disservice to overlook exactly what you just articulated. Some of these efficiencies can lead to better creativity. Two examples that just jumped to mind while you were talking. I remember, early in my corporate career, it was like, a revolution when you could, and I'm forgetting the name of that's how old it is, but when you could send a group email, well, mail merge, the
Yeah.
mail merge function, in the mid 90s was a huge deal. And I remember thinking, like, does anyone want to go back to a world where that required three people spending a week writing out? That was an efficiency. It saved paper. It allowed people in lower level jobs to advance more quickly. So there's just one obvious example, but I've told the story a million times, but it's still relevant, that when I was in grad school for literature, I had this professor, God love her, who was so excited about, she was the quintessential kind of old school academic, and she just loved talking about the tradition and history of what she did. But the class that she taught me was library research. And one of the things that, I mean, she literally said these words: what connects us as scholars to the medieval times is we all go to the stacks and we pull the books down and we find our research. And 3 years later, that class didn't exist anymore because the internet happened. And rather than bemoan the fact that we didn't go to the stacks, I remember thinking, and I think now, Shawn, imagine the power of the research papers we can write when we have access to all the research. It's too much of a good thing, but what that results in is papers that are more inclusive, represent a more profound diversity of thought, of frankly a much less white and male perspective, which is always welcome, especially
Yeah.
in academia. It doesn't mean you even have to go down those roads, but the fact that you're pulling in thoughts from different languages that would have just been impossible to access in an analog world. I look at those types of things and say, even for the most old school academics, there is a lot of power for creativity in all of this technology.
Yeah, and I think just like innovation is iterative, creativity is also iterative, and we build on the shoulders of giants, as the saying goes, right? We're building on our predecessors. It is still the goal of most people to come up with the next unique thought, to come up with the next original thought, to progress science and arts beyond where we are confined today. And so, I don't see that AI changes that at all. It doesn't change the goals. It doesn't change the objectives. Are there people out there who are going to use it to try to shortcut the system, to try to put out more content? Certainly, we're going to have an explosion of content. You're already seeing that in social media with the number of comments that are being generated or the number of posts that are being generated using generative AI. But the goal is still to come up with an original idea, and I don't see that changing. And so the question then for me becomes, how do I use some of these tools to help organize my ideas, to help me think through ideas, to help me push the limits of my understanding? How can I use these tools to better understand a concept and expand that idea? And then to your point, the a huge amount of information that we now have available to us is good, but now we have to still decipher what's valuable in all of that, and where do we employ all of that information, and how do we use that. One other final thought that I had as it relates to your comment about efficiency and productivity, we always worry that efficiency and productivity means I'm going to lose my job. And yet, where we typically employ productivity and efficiency gains is in the jobs that we don't want to do anymore. We use it to allow us to get away from the type of things that we don't want to do. And if you go back to, the homes of the 50s, that was things like dishwashers and washing machines and dryers and what I would call robots. Today, we don't call them robots anymore, but they are robots. They've automated some of these things away from us. And they were things we didn't necessarily want to do. And it freed us up to do a lot of other things. And it freed up, a significant part of the population to enter the workforce and to do other things that besides washing dishes, washing clothes, and the like. So I think the same thing will happen with new emerging technologies and new tools, whether it's AI or something beyond AI. We're going to use it to help us move away from the tasks that we don't want to do and move towards the tasks that we do want to do.
Totally. And you and I have talked about this. I've written quite a bit about it, so I'll be brief. But one of the things that I've maintained, and I still think it's true, is AI is not going to replace writing, because the reason people have always responded to writing, going back centuries, is very familiar ideas expressed in different ways, or people bringing their own experience to illustrate how we are connected across centuries and cultures and languages. Things like death and grief and love, these are universal things. So that would be like saying, well, I've already read the poem about love, but there's millions of them because everyone experiences it in similar and different ways. So I never worry too much, but I also think what you're opening up in this discussion is there's a self-correcting mechanism. So the more we see AI auto-populating, chat and comments, I think that makes people crave authenticity and originality more. So there's this beautiful tension between, there is more of this stuff proliferating, but it's also making people remember what they liked about the things that AI or technology isn't good at. And those two things can live comfortably together. And the only thing I'd add to my previous comment is, as it relates to story with a capital S, specifically creative and academic, there was a certain safety up through the 20th century of, there was authority and gatekeeping. So those proverbial tomes that you got from the stacks, that was a handful of people who had an opinion that was received as common knowledge. And all of this was being filtered out over and over. We weren't necessarily getting new perspectives or new thoughts. To me, AI and the access, or technology and the access to all this information actually makes the storytellers work harder, because the more they have to sort through and understand what's relevant or what's meaningful, it actually keeps you on your toes. So it's not a shortcut to thought. It's not a shortcut to getting the work done. It actually puts the onus back on the storyteller to filter out a lot of that information. So again, I think there's a wonderful kind of self-reinforcing mechanism where you get access to more easily, but then you have to do more work to make it presentable and make it sing a little bit. So again, I end up on the side of optimism as it relates to all of this.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that there is this self-correcting mechanism, and at sometimes that self-correcting mechanism can be, if you will, destructive in nature. So when it comes to AI generated content that is flooding social media today, I do believe that it is making social media less valuable. You're spending less time reading comments because the comments aren't very valuable, and the signal to noise ratio has declined in some of these settings. And so I do think that social media as we know it today probably doesn't exist in a world where there's a flood of generated AI content and it can be produced by anybody in anywhere in the world. Already, I think you're seeing that shift happen, and we're moving towards group chats. We're moving towards these other mechanisms. And so you pointed out, rightfully so, I think that there's still this craving for authenticity. We recognize we're not finding it in these type of broader settings anymore. So we're moving into smaller groups. We're moving into I think like group chats in a digital setting. We've seen an explosion of group chats in the last year, and I don't think that's accidental. I think that timing aligns with an explosion of less valuable content broadly on the internet, which is forcing us into more tightly controlled circles.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. So I am never afraid to talk politics, although I don't think it's particularly germane to generally discussions of this sort, and this one in particular. But so this is political with a lowercase p. But one of the things that I'm observing and I think is playing out sociopolitically right now is this whole notion of hacking, hacks, efficiencies, and expertise. And there's a really interesting tension between notions of authority, who knows best, who knows what. And I think thinking about you in particular, Shawn, I'd love you to weigh in a little bit about, just because someone's rich doesn't mean that they understand economics. Just because someone has inherited or run a company doesn't mean they understand how the government works. Just like someone who's been in the government and means well doesn't mean they know how business works. I think what's good about the way things are playing out right now is we're getting an opportunity kind of in the Frankenstein's laboratory of the people that talk the loudest aren't necessarily the experts. Um, how do you see the tension, especially because you are an expert in economic theory, economic history? Are we in a stage right now where people that have said effectively, because they're good storytellers, again on all sides of the aisle, but people that have told a very compelling story but maybe don't have the expertise to back up these stories, and the country is being experimented with, where does this tension and experimentation play out in terms of what people can feel good about, in terms of leadership, in terms of expertise, and the fact that maybe doing things where you come in and go, I can eliminate all that waste. Again, on both sides of the aisle, maybe a more measured approach, as we've tended to have in the past, is balanced for a reason, because that tends to yield more predictable and tolerable results. That was a bit of a rant, but I'm just curious for you to weigh in on that.
I think if you look at the current political dynamic, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainties. There's a lot of change happening over a very short period of time, and as a result of that, broadly, you've seen that uncertainty impact confidence and broadly sentiment. So you see it among consumers who are apprehensive about the future. You see it among business leaders who are also apprehensive about the future and maybe hesitant to make big decisions, big investments, because they're not sure what type of world will exist in 60 days or 120 days or 365 days. And so they're taking a more wait and see approach. And so I think what I see from a storytelling perspective is that there is a tremendous amount of nuance that exists behind stories, especially stories that might be painted with big, broad strokes. When you look at how dynamic the economy is, especially how dynamic the global economy is, and how interconnected the global economy is, it's important that while stories provide some shortcuts to help us understand broad and basic frameworks, that there is a lot of nuance that plays out behind that. I think the same is also true with individual jobs and all of our jobs, frankly, is that there's a lot of nuance in what we do. It's highly dynamic. The age of I've got one job and this is what I do, and it's a single task and it's singular in nature, is frankly something that I don't think exists very much, even in places that you might expect it to exist, like manufacturing. Manufacturers are trying to be more adaptive, more agile. They're looking to be able to adjust productions. And all you have to do is look at the type of vehicles that are produced today, how diverse they are. The interiors are different, the feature sets are different compared to what might have existed in the past. Like, business has shifted significantly. The example I love is in fashion. If you take a look at shoes, companies like Nike historically made very few models, but they made a lot of them, and they made them as cheap as possible. Now they make a tremendous assortment of models. They launch new shoes and release new shoes every single day of every single week, and they're doing it in smaller quantities, but there's this diversity that happens. And behind all that diversity are manufacturing systems and manufacturing workers who are constantly shifting what they do. So I think when we hear big, broad stories, it's important for us also to remember that behind those stories are a lot of nuance, and within each one of those pockets of nuances is a whole nother series of stories. That's the beauty of storytelling, is that it isn't this story versus that story. It's that within these stories, there's all these different viewpoints. And so going back to your comment about the economy, there are a lot of changes happening right now. Some of the outcomes of those changes remain to be seen. But it for me has really reiterated the dynamic nature of the global economy and how interconnected it all is, and how supply chains, when you think about it, are quite dynamic, and so there's a lot happening right now.
So bravo, folks, you can see why I love this guy and have learned a lot from him. I also appreciate that you took a very inelegantly phrased question and made it much more clear. I think what I was also trying to get at was, again, in a nonpartisan way, what I've observed, one of the things I've observed in the last few years, I think has become a bit of a crisis, is this very American assumption that everything can be hacked. Whether it's betting on baseball games, to writing a novel, to running a company, like there's a more creative, efficient way to do that. And it's like, look, we're all about finding ways to reduce redundancy, ways to make things more efficient, ways to make things more fun, more productive. But if we lose the human element, or we discard expertise, it's good to be reminded that everything doesn't have a shortcut, and especially as it relates to story, for what you just articulated so perfectly, this notion of dynamic, interconnected assets all of those things make any story run, whether it's the economy, whether it's a novel. And so I'm hoping to see a correction of sorts where we recognize that because it's on a big platform right now, again, this notion of everything can be, everything is bloated, everything can be done quicker and easier. It's like some things do take time to make a good wine or a good bourbon, to write a good book. These things require time, and nuance and balance. So as always, I hope that this balance, it becomes more the norm. And while we ride these roller coasters of kind of public sentiment, or whatever the ways the political winds are blowing, we usually end up back in a little bit more balanced place.
Yeah, and I think as individuals who are involved in creative arts, whether it's professional storytelling or some other aspect of storytelling, it's important to think through, what do I want to hack? Where do I want to hack? Where do I want to try to find small efficiency gains and productivity gains? And I think that's one of the great challenges right now with generative AI is at first you had this, I don't want to touch it at all. I'm not going to use it at all. I don't want it to impact my art at all. And then you had others who went the other way and said, I'm going to use it for everything. I'm going to let it generate all of my original ideas. And so I think we're now starting to move in the right direction, where even the best writers on the planet are realizing, hey, I can use these tools to help organize some of my thinking. I can use it to streamline some of my promotions. I can help it, I can use it to think through my business model, because I don't want to waste my cognitive resources on that, when I could be using those cognitive resources to think through my next big idea. And so for all of us, whether it's AI or something else, I think we need to think through, what part of my job do I want to hack, and where do I want to keep, going back to your earlier comment, the authenticity? Where do I want to keep it, the original thought, and really focus on what's uniquely me, and where can I use AI to to improve what I'm able to bring to the world?
Yeah, so well put. And yeah, and I think the other thing is, of course, I think again throughout the centuries there have always been the people who refuse. I mean, I know that there are writers that are proudly still don't have email and still write in a typewriter. It's like the world still turns, and whatever helps you write or tell your best story, the technology will continue to impact the world around you, and arguably make things on balance a little bit better. But none of this is prescriptive. If it's in the service of either helping you write a better story or connect with a wider audience that you might not have even imagined reaching, say, 20 years ago, that's all to the good. Shifting a little bit, I think I'd be remiss to, because you're just often in executive suites. I mean, you're talking to all the workers at these companies that you visit, but you have conversations with decision makers. And while I'm always happy to advocate for the humanities, not even something so nakedly self-serving as that, but just generally one of the ways when I'm asked by students, do the humanities matter with AI and technology and efficiency? What I tell people is, when I was your age, I was told being able to write and think is always going to be a skill set that's valuable in any workforce. I think that's still true. But something you said earlier really clicked for me, Shawn, which was, and I agree with it completely, we no longer have the luxury of having a job that we can describe in one or two words. Very few people, whether it's a professor or a CEO, can say, or the president of a university can say, I do these three things every day. We're all obliged to wear a lot of hats. Because of that, I remain very bullish on any education that allows someone to think critically, to think analytically, to be able to organize information efficiently and effectively. But what are some, so first of all, I'd love your thoughts on that generally, but also like when you're talking to these executives and they're talking about the type of workforce they want to see, or the type of employees that they're not seeing enough of, what are some words of wisdom and encouragement you have for the younger in our audience that are like trying to puzzle out, what do I do the rest of my life?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think there will always be a very positive return for cognitive capabilities in our economy. There will always be a positive economic opportunity for people who can think through hard problems and come up with unique solutions. Uh, Obviously, if you look at everything that's happened with generative AI, it's all about the English language and other languages. It's all about how you structure a sentence, how you structure a paragraph, how you put together an idea. And so there's a lot of people working on generative AI that have backgrounds in linguistics or backgrounds in understanding how language forms and how language evolves. I think that's important. So I think there's always going to be demand for strong cognitive capabilities and being able to think through problems and to problem solve and to think outside of, as the proverbial box, to be able to bring creativity into what we're doing. And I think there's always going to be a desire for being able to bring energy and innovation into any setting. I think the other thing is to recognize that these changes play out over very long periods of time. And that's one of the reasons why I am optimistic that the majority of the workforce will evolve, because these technologies, while they feel abrupt and can feel sudden, and sometimes they do move quickly, ultimately the societal shift is what really drives change, and that takes much longer. And so um, I just think that there's still a huge opportunity for being able to bring strong cognitive capabilities to any setting.
Right on. Are there any technology or economic or any other topics or questions that I have failed to tee up? Because I feel like I've got a middle of the lineup fastball hitter, and I want to throw a meatball down the plate. So I would be not doing my job if Shawn leaves here saying, "I can't believe he didn't ask me about this." Is there anything that that's giving you either cause for concern or enthusiasm, like in 2025?
I mean, I always worry about, outside of technology, I always worry about the next generation. I always worry about how they're doing, how they're coping, how they're seeing the world. I think there's a lot of dynamics that are playing out for them, not just from a technology standpoint, but that the future of work is evolving rapidly, and where they fit into their community, I think is something that I think deeply about, and I find myself often concerned about. The old saying, the kids are all right. I worry constantly, is that still true? Is that still the case? And what do we have to do to ensure that? When you look at the younger generation, you do see some really interesting dynamics. They associate with entrepreneurship quite high. When they look at the jobs that they're most inspired by, or the careers that they're most impressed with, it's often entrepreneurs that really capture them and that they're really interested in following. And so I think that's an interesting shift that's happened. If you go back to when we were kids, it was looking up to politicians, it was looking up to professional athletes, it was looking up to people who were in public service, like military or first responders. And that has evolved significantly, and you see that in the popular zeitgeist, if you will. It's part of the reason why, until perhaps more recently, people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and others were so popular and so well known, and because they aligned with, I think, a younger generation that was attracted to and admired entrepreneurs and wanted to be entrepreneurs. And so I do think that dynamic means that the future of work will have to be more entrepreneurial, that businesses, if they want to attract the next workforce, will have to add in elements of entrepreneurship into every job, every aspect of every job. And so I think that's both a challenge, but also an opportunity. And I'm excited to see how that plays out. And that goes back to my previous comment about the role that cognitive capability can be. I think there's going to be more and more jobs where we're going to, it's going to require independent thought and independent action. And then just, more broadly, there's still a lot of technologies, many that we didn't touch on, that will have big societal changes that are finally starting to gain traction. And it'll, again, this still play out over a very long period of time. But if you just take a look at something like self-driving vehicles, Waymo has doubled the number of rides that they deliver on a weekly basis in the last year. They've gone from 100,000 rides to 200,000 rides a week. Now that may not sound like a lot. We do almost 7 billion. We do a little over 7 billion rides a week. So there's still a long way to go to catch up to with how many places we drive and ride. But as that technology improves and as it becomes more pervasive, I think it will have some really interesting societal implications. So that's a little aside from storytelling, but there's a lot of technologies playing out on the peripheral that I think will impact how we live.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, and history shows that that's always going to be the case. Like we can predict a lot, but we never know, both politically, culturally, technologically, what is going to disrupt. And again, going back to my own, I remember being in grad school and seeing this World Wide Web. And I thought that was the silliest, like, what is a spider web? What? And like 2 years later, I worked at a company, using the internet every day. It's like 2 years that everything happened. So I always think about those big benchmarks to keep me humble about you need to be cognizant of what's going on and read the tea leaves and be informed. But we don't know, for better or worse, what kind of disruption could happen. I also want to say I appreciate your comment about entrepreneurship because lest anyone, somewhat understandably, think what is he talking about? Like entrepreneur. One of the things I've been saying without really using that word, when I talk to writers in particular, is one way that the literary industry has changed dramatically, without even really assigning a quality to it. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I think it's a bit of both. But the old paradigm where you wrote a book, you got an agent, it went to a publishing house, and they handled everything from there. That's not only in the rear view, it's never coming back. So now the onus is on the writer to at least have a passing familiarity with PR, with promotion and technology. They need to have a social media presence, whether they're active or not. That you cannot be aloof and arrogant about how you find and attract audiences. So the entrepreneurial aspect of all areas of life is absolutely the future. And I think if we lean into that and demystify some of the baggage, because of course, when we say entrepreneur, depending on the setting, it's a very positive thing. It always has been in American culture. But in the arts, I think the people would be like, whoa, what are you talking about? The reality, and I think this is the overarching thing that you and I have talked about for years, Shawn, is when we start getting into the nuts and bolts of technology, we can and should address the threats, the fears, the possible positive outcomes. But again, there's always going to be a balance and finding the ways that it impacts your life and how you can use it to impact your life in a better way. That's the right approach because I think that leads to efficiency, productivity, but also more positive engagement with the work you're doing.
Yeah, and I think as you rightfully noted, whether it's writing a book and bringing your words into the world, that requires a lot more work on your behalf than just producing the words. And it provides a diversity of work. It isn't just doing one thing. You've got to do all of these different things to build your community around your work. And I think that theme, that idea is playing out in lots of different parts of work. And so in many ways, the future of work is storytelling. It is showing up and becoming more pervasive and being able to bring a story to the world, whether that's within your small definition of a world within your organization or your department, or a much broader definition of the word world. It is about breathing life into that story and bringing it to light.
Yeah, I mean, spoken like a master storyteller. So I also would be remiss if I didn't put you on the spot a little bit and say, Hey, New York Times bestseller, what's in the pipeline? I know you're a very busy and in-demand speaker, but those of us that love seeing the way you write, any projects in the pipeline, anything that you're either working on or looking forward to being consumed by in the coming months or years?
Yeah, I mean, I'm writing on the current trends of the day, whether those are technology or economic trends. And right now, one of the ideas that I've been exploring, and whether that comes to fruition as a full manuscript or not, remains to be seen. But it is around this idea of what do we do to future-proof our decision making? What are some ways that we can make better decisions moving forward? And so I this will borrow from some of the trends in technology. It will borrow from behavioral economics and the impact that psychology has on the way we make decisions. And are there learnings from that can help us build frameworks to make better decisions? So I've been spending a lot of time um, going through the literature and working through what I think is missing from that, so I too can bring new ideas to the world.
That's awesome. Very happy to hear it. And I will say as we draw toward the end of this ongoing discussion, this is just another, segment, but it's interesting, right? Because again, anyone that knows me knows that like I advocate for art and the artists all day, every day, always will. I can speak all day about why I think this is important. But as someone that's directing a center for story and people saying, well, what does that mean? Are you talking about writing? One of the things I love and a kind of inherent both opportunity and irony in that is often I'm not talking at all about the written word. And the reason that I want to bring people specifically from outside the art world is because I think it's imperative for anyone that understands or wants to celebrate or utilize story needs to have the input from experts in a variety of fields because that leads to richer thought. It leads to more original connections. It leads to networking. And yes, it does inevitably lead to more original and engaging stories because I think the time has passed where one could live in the literal clouds and think up their stories. I mean, we're always going to have room for that. But for people to have a meaningful contemporary audience, I just think the time has passed where someone can avoid politics, can avoid current events, can avoid understanding competing ideas, and try to synthesize a lot of these tensions into something that's engaging and opens up dialogue. So more of people like yourself that are able to show younger students why it's important to not silo their thinking or the way they approach how they engage with the work they want to do, the more diverse thoughts and areas of expertise, the better.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, as always, as you all can see, Shawn and I get going, and it's hard to shut us down. We talked before we came on air. We'll talk after we go off the air, but today really is. It's all about Shawn and my enduring appreciation. What little I know and can articulate about technology has been indelibly impacted by your thinking and the example that you set. So, Shawn, you're always available and willing to take the call, and I call you often. So I want to thank you as always for being available, for sharing. You're so generous with your time, with your expertise, and your patience because you're talking often to people who don't know nearly as much as you do on a variety of topics, but you're able to make it accessible. You're able to make it exciting, and I think that's your special gift as a storyteller and as a human being. You infuse this positivity and optimism with the way that you attack all these different things. And that leaves people more curious, more informed. It's a tremendous gift, and you have been called to share it, but it's a generosity that you have that makes you willing to share it.
Well, thank you. You're always much too kind. I mean, I love following you and hearing all that you're working on as well.
Well, here's to further collaboration and further conversation. Shawn, I'll put this in all the follow-up write-ups, but for people that want to go online right now and look you up and discover you, what's the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, you can go to ShawnDuBravac.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn or other places as ShawnDuBravac.com.
Or you can go to wherever books are sold and check out his New York Times best-selling book. That's Shawn, Shawn. Again, we'll put this in the write-up. Shawn, tremendous honor, tremendous pleasure. We will talk again. So to be continued. Folks, thanks for joining us for Some Things Considered. This, again, is the podcast where we talk about story. We want to break it down. We want to chew on it. We want to analyze it. We want to get excited about it. So help spread the word. If you want to be a guest or know someone that should be a guest, send a shout out. In the meantime, be safe, be kind, and stay creative. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at ShawnMurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Shawn Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.